Now, what you've all been waiting for, our Fireside Chat, for which I invite first our Tapia Conference General Chair, Patricia Ordonez, to the stage to introduce our fabulous panel moderator and our insightful panelists.
I'm honored to kick off the Tapia opening with the Fireside Chat on the topic of technology innovations in response to the pandemic, which is aligned with our conference theme of a time to celebrate resilience, adaptability, and innovation in computing. This session is arranged as a fireside chat to be a discussion among panelists and a panel moderator. At this time, I invite to the stage the panel moderator, Dr. Jamika Burge, recipient of the Tapia 2021 of the 2021 Tapia Award, Commandant Board of Advisors, member and leader of the Experience and Products and Platforms team at Capital One, and co-founder of blackcomputeher.org, and also someone that I met at Tapia a long time ago. Our panelists, Tiffany Polk, Managing Director at JP Morgan, and Victor Scotti, Head Equity Lead at Google. Jamika, you ready to take it away?
I'm as ready as I'll ever be, but it's nice to be in front of a friendly audience. So thank you so much, Patty, for that introduction. I'm making an assumption there, but hopefully it's one that's true. Tapia has always been home for me, and I feel like I'm coming home. So y'all let me know if I don't look right, or if the makeup's smudged, or if I got a hair out of place. Y'all will get me right. Y'all will too. It's really great to be here. I wish I had more time with my co-panelists today, but I'm excited about the conversation because it's impossible to talk about resilience, adaptability, innovation in computing without talking about the people for whom these kinds of words are designed, right? Absolutely. We've been a long way over these last 2 years.
Absolutely.
And what I'd like to do before we jump right in is first just hear from both of you a little bit about your background. And the piece I would love for you to share too is what part of the world are you in right now? Because for the first time for me anyway, where I'm coming from matters because getting to where I'm going matters. I've never been so careful about where I'm going to be going and how I'm going to be getting there because COVID has changed all of our lives. So I want to acknowledge that many of you went through a lot to get here today. Others are still coming, and others still might have just had to walk a few blocks. But all that matters because we've been so far in these last 2 years. I live in Alexandria, but I also commute to North Carolina. I drive. I'm not yet ready to get on a plane. Maybe we'll talk about that. But it's the reality. It's the reality where we are right now. I've been here in the DC area for about 11 years, going on 12 years. When I say that word, that number, it makes me feel super old. I'm not that old, but still, time has very different meaning these days.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to be here in DC. I work at Capital One, that's my day job. I lead a design research team, and we focus on understanding customer needs. Our team of about 25 people serves about 600 of our associate colleagues. So we have a lot of responsibility, but we remember that at the end of the day, the people are who matter. I'm also, though, really excited to be here because I represent Black Computer. There's some fellows in the audience, some fellow sisters who recognize that term. Black Computer is a nonprofit organization designed to support, develop, encourage, love, and build Black women in computing, and allies, of course. But we recognize that there are so few dimensions of support for Black women that we think it's important to call out this community. Because so much of what we can learn about ourselves, we learn about those who are different from the mainstream. And I'm proud to say I grew up as a Black girl and I'm a Black woman. So let's talk about what that means to thrive in computing today. That said, Tiffany, I would love to start with you. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and what part of the world you're coming from.
Awesome. I came here today from Middletown, Delaware. That is where I live, and I have been there for almost 5 years. Prior to that, I lived in Pennsylvania and lived in DC for quite a while before that. I hail from Dallas, Texas, born and raised, but have not lived there since college. Went to college in New Hampshire. Alum of Dartmouth. If anybody's bleeding green out here, I'm with you. Woo! And I did my master's degree at University of Maryland. So DC was home for me for quite some time and miss it greatly, actually. I currently work for JP Morgan. Been with the firm for 9 years in December. And prior to that, I was with EMC. Hewlett Packard, and worked for various systems integrators in the DC area prior to that for our military partners and other intelligence agencies. So I've been in tech my whole career, but financial services tech still feels new to me sometimes. But I have grown to love what I do at the firm. I've held various roles throughout my 9 years. I ran all of the storage infrastructure for the firm for 4.5 years. That's probably the longest stint in what I've known for. So across block, file, object, and data protection, soup to nuts. So primary and secondary storage. You can imagine that was fun. And I now am the CTO for corporate responsibility in Morgan Health. I never thought I would get the chance to have my passion for impact in community and what our firm is known for in terms of what we do in the marketplace. I never thought I would be able to do that as my day job. And I've just started doing that in July. So I am extremely excited to be working on behalf of that customer and helping their data solutions drive the $30 billion in impact finance for the firm that we are going to continue to move forward in terms of trying to affect change in the broader community. I think that technology was my chosen profession because I don't think there's anywhere else that you can work that allows the change at scale in society that technology does. Everywhere else I think about in terms of a profession, to me, has ceilings and barriers. And when I think about what we get up and do every day, the limitless potential and capability that we have in order to impact the world is just about imagination, creativity, and then your ability to be able to execute. So I'm excited to have this conversation today because I think that the way that that happens has to be equitable, and I think all of us have a responsibility to make sure we lean on that.
Limitless potential. Can we put that on a t-shirt and then sell it? I mean, I think that really is a lovely way of anchoring this conversation and talking about what it means to fuel our passions, which is exciting. Congratulations on having that opportunity. And acknowledging that your experience in the role also brings so much to the role that impacts so many other people. Thank you for sharing your story, and welcome back home. Victor,
hey.
Tell us more about yourself, sir.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. My name is Victor Scotty. I live here in DC, so my fiance and I moved here about a year ago. So really happy to be here. It took me about 20 minutes to get here. Born and raised in Chicago on the south side of the city. Very proud of where I'm from, and I also think it frames so much of who I am and the work that I do and why I do the work that I do. After high school, went to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. I studied sociology and urban education. So I've always been interested in people. I come from a family of educators, so access and equity and what that can look like, especially for children and kids, has always been really important to me. And so I knew that I wanted to impact children, particularly Black kids, all my life. I never imagined what form that would take. it was while I was at Penn that I got connected with Google. And I learned about people operations, which I like to call HR plus. You have your core HR functions. Some of you might, when you imagine HR, that's what I'm talking about there. But you also have folks like me and my team that you might have met at the booth or another part of this conference, where we really focus on students and people and what does it look like for you all to come to Google, and not only to come, but also to thrive. So I just came back to Google actually 3 months ago. I started my career there as an intern and then worked there full time for 7 years. Then I did a short stint, still in tech, but at Netflix, so the intersection of tech and entertainment, but just had to come back to Google. I think the impact quotient and potential is so high. And so echoing what my fellow panelists said, when I think about tech, I really think about innovation and scale and impact. And to me, it's such a blessing to be able to work on the people side of that within diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I've done everything from like your core diversity, equity, inclusion work, working with our employee resource groups, also external engagement, as well as student development. So I've run a lot of programs for students who attend historically Black colleges and universities and Hispanic serving institutions in particular. And so I'm really excited to be here because the early career space is so important to me. And I think one of the most pivotal points in our career journey. There's so many norms, if you will, and I know we'll unpack that in a second, and ways of being that I think that we can just easily seek to fit into once we step foot at a company like a Google, for example. But I like to think about Google as a space, and what I strive towards every day is how can it be expansive enough for everyone to fit? So for me, identifying as a Black queer man, I am really grateful for my experiences at Google and the space that it provided me in order to be myself, to explore what that means for me and be able to connect that back to my work. So excited to be here, excited to, to engage with you all and to really talk about this moment that we're in right now.
Thank you. And lots of what you said struck me, and we're going to get to exactly one of those things that you talked about in terms of bringing ourselves to the work and finding ourselves in these spaces, right? And what does that look like? Mm-hmm. I heard intersections of tech and entertainment. I love that because the reminder for us is that tech is all around us.
Absolutely.
And there's so many ways to make impact, to drive impact, and to make differences in ways that are purely tech. If you're the coder or the developer, mm-hmm. those days are behind me and it's okay. But there are also other ways of making impact that absolutely drive the kinds of technology that we use. So let's start with the last 2 years of where we were and what that meant for you. And I've got some notes here, although I don't think I'll need them so much, but bear with me because we've all got stories mm-hmm. about what the last couple of years looked like. And I want us to center on what I think are some core reminders for the last 3 years. We saw social justice as a big part of how we showed up through the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and lots of others. In fact, in 2020, we saw a marked increase in the number of trans people who were killed. Mm-hmm. And that number increased in 2021. So reminding us of the people who often aren't in the rooms, but are part of the innovation that we are charged with supporting. Mm-hmm. We also saw a lot of cultural inequities and hate in our Asian communities especially. Some of you felt that. You're still feeling that. And it's the reality of what you've seen maybe all of your lives. And then there was also this deep awareness for those who weren't able to shelter in place, who were deemed essential workers, mm-hmm. who didn't have the opportunity to work from home, who didn't have access perhaps to the technology or even the careers to work from home, to be able to shelter, maybe even to purchase groceries without having to leave the house. those are realities of many of us in our communities. Start with me, Victor, and share a little bit about what the last 2 years meant for you personally. Like, what are takeaways that resonated with you that perhaps shaped the way you view the world in a way that, if the last 2 years hadn't happened, might not be part of your lived experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. And even your remarks brought me back to that time. So I was actually living in Chicago at the time. I was still at my first stint with Google. I was actually living in the neighborhood that the Google office is in, which is the West Loop neighborhood. I mentioned earlier that being from Chicago framed a lot of who I am. If you know even a little bit about Chicago, you know that it's very racially segregated. So when I say, as a Black man, that I live in West Loop, I'm one of the only. The lines in the city are so starkly drawn. And I start there because I chose to live in West Loop with the full understanding that I would be able to move about the city, move about the world. So when the pandemic hit and we did have to shelter in place, there was an awareness of my body, of who I am, the work that I do. So thinking about equity every day, I felt like that lens was turned on me. And so how I felt at the time, or how it's really changed my life, community became a lot more important. I was traveling all the time. I was going out with friends all the time, and I took that for granted. I would say, oh, I got plans on Friday, or I have plans on Saturday. Living alone at the time and not having the ability to be able to do those things safely was heartbreaking. It was challenging. My parents are also significantly older, and my mom has health challenges, so I wasn't able to visit them for a while. So what became most important to me is that awareness of how I was feeling, taking those moments to pause and to actually be true to what that means. And then also safely figuring out and navigating how I could find that community that I needed. And for me, that personal journey and literally having to figure that out every day, it gave me a new dimension when I think about equity, and when I think about inclusion, and when I think about what it means to co-create belonging. I had been doing the work really since I graduated college, so at that time for about 7 or 8 years. And I had begun to take it for granted a bit, actually, because it was what I did. And so there was this distinct moment where all the things that I talked about or wrote emails about or advised my employee resource groups about, I was dealing with it at the very same time. And so I'm so much better for what we've collectively been through, but also what I've personally been through in the last 3 years, because I think it's made me who I am now. And I would say a much more connected person. I think I believe a lot more in humanity and connectedness, and how that can take us places together. And I think that tech has the ability to really enable what we do with that.
I want to come back to that. How does tech enable the humanity that we bring just by living, right? Just by showing up. And I want to get to, as well, what did you see at your company, and all of us can answer that question too, to address that humanity, which is often missing in our workplaces. But first, Tiffany, what about you? What are the takeaways for you of the last couple of years that continue to resonate with and for you in how you show up at work?
Yeah. So I think for me, February 2020, I had my second hip replaced. So COVID came for me at a very interesting time because I was already off and was planning on being remote for a while. And the timing of it coincided with my recovery. And I think that for me, my perspective was actually a little bit different from most people because I did not have the abruptness that most people did. And so I felt a little eased into it. Now, when my children came home from school, that all changed. That did not feel eased, but I woke up then. But I will tell you that I look back on it now and realize that I'm actually very grateful that I had that health challenge because the abruptness that I hear from other people, I think would have been very difficult for me to deal with. My personality would have I would have had a very hard time transitioning. I come from EMC and HP for a big part of my career before I came to JP Morgan and have been in a remote work situation for a lot of my career. In fact, coming to JP Morgan was a pretty monumental decision for me. I had never had an in-office position and been a mother. So all of my official positions were work from home as long as I had had children. And so moving away from that when my youngest was 2 was not an inconsequential decision. I came to the firm with a very bullish mindset around flexibility and being a proponent of flexibility. I do believe it is about flexibility. I think that sometimes we talk about balance. I've never known anybody in tech to be balanced. I don't know who those balanced
Say it
people are.
again.
They don't work in technology. So I like to use the word flex. We can be flexible. So I did not feel like, from a work perspective, that the transition into being 100% remote was necessarily a big deal for me. I had done that before. It was very difficult for my team. And I think that what I realized most when it comes to work is that it allowed us to have a perspective on our global nature that we did not have before. The very myopic US-centered way in which we worked was always something we acknowledged, but it was not something that we ever really tried very hard, I don't think, to fix necessarily. And I think that what the pandemic allowed us to do was to have a very even playing field when it comes to access and ability to engage. So the ways in which people who were in proximity or in region to each other had the advantage of location and proximity in order to drive relationship, that was nullified. So all of a sudden, our tools around whiteboarding, our tools around telepresence, all of the ways in which we met, all of a sudden we started to realize talent and capability on the team that we did not realize before because how we worked together actually had bias in the system that we weren't fully aware of. That was all going on the heels of me getting divorced. So I got divorced the year before COVID. Thank God, by the way, because that would not have gone well. I wouldn't be on this stage right now. That had not happened, I will tell you that. So I will tell you that navigating being a single mother and coming off of hip surgery and having your kids at home, all of that together also made me, I think, particularly well-suited to help my people through whatever challenges and realities that they have. And the reason why I share that particular piece of knowledge about my personal life is because I think that that is also what COVID allowed us to do.
Yeah.
It allowed us to strip away the masks that many of us were very used to wearing. And even if some of us did not necessarily feel comfortable at first, it languished so long, we really didn't have a choice. Because when your kid is in the background and, your dog is jumping up on your lap, or, your husband forgets that you're on camera and he walks by in his underwear, like at that point, there's no more secrets.
That's right.
So, but that authenticity and capability and shared human experience globally, right? That's the real kicker for me. It was globally shared. I think put us in a space where I couldn't imagine we were capable of. our families were along for the ride. So I personally did not feel as disjointed as I had felt before. The traveling and everything that I used to do, I was in Asia 3 or 4 times a year. I was in the UK twice a year. I did not realize how frantic and frenetic my life was until COVID. And I have vowed to myself that I will never do that again. And so the question around how I have changed is I have actually realized that the only thing that is important to me is how I spend my time. And that the way you think about how you spend your time is the most important thing, because everything else follows from that. And if you are not absolutely intentional, you run the risk of going back to being led instead of being intentional. And I think that for me is the biggest lesson, is how can I not fall prey to, how can I not fall victim to the chaos that swirls around me and allow it to take me, and instead be as intentional about my time now as I was during the pandemic.
Intentionality, like, you have the best phrases that I promise I'm going to sell on t-shirts. But, you know, the way we were living our lives absolutely was different 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? Thank you for sharing your story about your own family experiences, because there has always been this clear demarcation between work and life.
Yeah.
There is no balance. Flexibility, yes, we might call it integration, but there is no balance.
Yeah.
And absolutely, these last 2 years, there was no boundary. None. And it's absolutely true. It is the truth that this level playing field of everybody having a little box through which to immigrate themselves and to show themselves into the world applied to everybody. Everybody. I'm deeply introverted. I know, I don't seem like it, but I am.
Same.
I thrived at work these last 2 years, and I am not looking forward to going back into the office, which started this week. We're going to talk about hybrid workplace a little bit too later on, but that's exactly the point. What works for most of us can't be what sustains everybody. So how do we manage through that? And so I want to come back to something that you said as well, Tiffany, around making that choice to be intentional and for your people, showing up for your people. How did the technology, and how does the technology, and what technology did you use and do you find helpful in maintaining that new pledge for yourself and for those in your work orbit?
So I do have to admit, I have a little bit of a cheat on this one, because prior to this role, I was the product owner for all of employee compute for the firm. So I will say that out front, 'cause I'm not brilliant whenever my comments come out of my mouth. It's just happened to be my day job. So when the whole firm went remote, needless to say, like most, we were not ready for that scale of remote activity, right? 250,000 people working remote immediately is certainly not something we had ever planned for and was not our model. We pivoted very quickly, partially because as a firm, we had already invested in VDI and we had already gone VDI. So our physical footprint for virtual desktops, our physical footprint in the firm is very small. So we did not have to worry about the large scale distribution of physical hardware to our employees in order to make it work. What we did have to worry about is the scale of the back-end infrastructure that was necessary in order to have remote access VDI for everyone, which is different from in-office access VDI and requires, you know, a different level of infrastructure for the remote capability. Once we figured that out, which actually didn't take very long, to be honest, we then realized that our existing video infrastructure was not going to do it. And we had to figure out the traders too. I will say that that particular piece was not easy. Our traders and their performance requirements, 100% remote was quite difficult. I think that when you have a firm that is as differentiated as ours is across multiple lines of business, the problem of this is very differentiated as well. If I were to boil it down to its essence, what we had to figure out is, how do we enable the entire firm to do day in and day out, every single day, what we already had the capability for some people to do all the time? So some of this was always going on at any given time. What was not ever going on globally was all of it at the same time. So that was the big deal. It came down to video conference was absolutely a must. You could not do it if people could not see each other on a video screen. There was no teleconference that was going to get us out of this. So we knew that. And we had Zoom as a partner at a very early point, because we realized that it didn't make any sense for us to try to invest in the infrastructure to get that done ourselves. Secondarily, we did what we needed to do to make sure that VDI was ubiquitous. I think the third thing that we figured out that actually took quite a bit of time is, so then what? Because it's not just video conferencing and people being able to get on their computers. There is a way in which that remoteness then drives a need for you to have the capability to be able to remotely collaborate. That was really hard. It was really hard to figure that one out. And I will tell you that I don't know that we've really figured it out, per se. I think that there is a way in which we have some great remote whiteboarding capabilities now. And I think that the ways in which we have figured some of that out is great. It's not great in hybrid, to be honest, right? So if half the people are remote and half the people are in an office setting, I don't think it's as slick and clean as it could be. I also think what we figured out after a while is that if it's not ubiquitous and mobile, it doesn't work. So having a sameness across your experience at home, in the office, and mobile is really the holy grail. And it is really hard to do, especially at scale, when you have so much legacy that you're dealing with and so many different businesses that have so many different applications and so many different needs. So my biggest lesson out of it in terms of the tools and the tech is that you have to have a foundational experience that is the same for everybody, regardless of persona. And once you achieve that, how you tweak and tailor individual personas is really important, but collaboration across the board and getting that right is really hard and is going to probably require a next-gen leap in tech before we really get it. And even once we do, I don't know that the VR, virtual reality kind of experience that I think we all have in our head that will make it great, will necessarily make it great.
That's right.
Because I think that we're human beings.
Yeah.
And our desire for in-person collaboration and communication isn't going away. And you can't replace it. So then the really hard work is figuring out, what does hybrid look like?
Yeah.
How do we make hybrid work? And how do we make hybrid work in a way that doesn't feel like it is overbearing and doesn't feel like it is one size fit all and is flexible enough to tweak and tailor, but is well understood that it is necessary, and we don't want to make anyone feel like they're isolated.
Ubiquity and mobility equals equity?
Perhaps, depending on not the what, but the how.
The how.
Yeah.
The how.
The how. And I think that's where technologists, that's what's hard for us. We love the what. We love a technical solution. Let me tell you something. You put all of us in a room together and you start talking about the right way to drive a data pipeline and what the UI should look like, and if you got the back, we'll argue all day long. When you start getting into the experience side of the equation, when you start getting into the how, we have a tough time because we love to think that the right technical solution will drive an outcome. And where we are sometimes, I think, lacking in insight is scale doesn't always mean sameness.
Yeah.
That's right. So much goodness there. We're going to get to some hybrid conversations a bit later, which I completely agree. It actually can't all be about the tech. It's about the how we do the thing that we do, right? And what does that look like in execution? Same question for you, Victor. What kinds of tools were informative to the reality of what the last 2 years brought people who were living at work and working at life, right?
Yeah.
That those two pieces, which sort of were in many ways fluid, whether we liked it or not. How did you find that, or what technologies did you find supported that integration, that flexibility?
Yeah, it's so interesting, Tiffany, hearing your experiences and your reflections, and especially the how and and the what, because at Google we have our own products. So we have Google Workspace, which I'll talk more about in a second. But we've had folks who have been remote for a while. Now, I will say it's been more, before COVID, it was more one-off or more special circumstance. However, we had that technology. However, and what we talked about all the time, we still talk about it, but in a different way, is really that magic of being in person and that connectivity of our offices. So we have so many offices around the world. Actually, like when I travel, our badges work in different office spaces. So there's so many internal conversations that we have and internal only tools where we can show people which offices that we've been to and what that experience is like. So a big part of our culture is coming to the office, is experiencing the culture and the norms and what it means to live in Tokyo or in Singapore through that office. And we have a really intentional real estate and workplace services team that makes those experiences magical. So then COVID hits, and then we can't go into the office. So that's a huge part of our culture that now is at that moment halted, literally, but then has to be redefined. At the time, I was actually working as an HR program manager with the Google Workspace team. So it was really interesting sitting with those technologists and thinking about, okay, what are our plans for Workspace, right? What were they? And now what do they need to be, right? When we think about market share and our users, right? Because you have other, telework services out there, right? You have Zoom, you have all types of things. So how do we position Google Meet and Hangouts and all of those products within our suite to be, the product of choice? And so I think what that transition taught me was that tech can be an enabler, but it's not the solution, right? So it's about quite literally how you use it. So now, for example, and if you all don't have the new Gmail interface, it's available, so go ahead and get that in settings, quick plug. But with that, right, like now you have Meet and Hangouts and even Jamboard for collaboration, which is like a virtual whiteboard, all in one space. Before COVID, and when it first hit, they were different products, right? Still within the suite, but separate products. So I think that we've had to think a lot about the how, and like how are folks actually using these products? What do we want it to enable? How is this making, life or work or play easier? And are there ways that we're actually hindering people's productivity, the ability to collaborate, especially across different time zones and, different cultures, right? Like, so what does that actually look like? And I think one of the biggest challenges I think that we had at the time and that I think we still have is how do we, now that we are returning to office, and I know we'll talk about hybrid work and what that looks like soon, but now that some folks are in the office, some are fully remote, some like me are in the office sometimes, in those meetings where maybe one meeting most people are in the office, then in the other most people are, on Hangouts. How do we make sure that folks have an equal amount of airtime? It can be really isolating being one of the only people virtual when everyone's in the room, or vice versa. How do we make sure that if I'm using Jamboard, right, is there actually a physical Jamboard in the room so that the person who is in person can use it? Or do you have to hook up your laptop, for example, for all of that to work? So I think that now we actually have the opportunity, and we've had the opportunity through the pandemic, to actually live and breathe our technology beyond our hardware, right? So, I've had a Pixel, all types of things, so I was comfortable using that. But now that we actually have to use, our Google products, how does it work? Is it actually working for everybody? What types of edge cases, or I shouldn't even say edge cases, but different experiences do we need to solve for? And what does that look like? So when we talk about scale and innovation, I think that we've actually hit a new level and a new way of thinking about that. We have so many different lenses through this collective shared experience that we've had. And I think ultimately that's only gonna make our products better. But we actually have to be super users of it. We have to be able to, to give that feedback. And we have to be taking the feedback from our users around the globe to make sure that it's the experience that we want for every single person.
Yeah. Is our hardware working for us? Absolutely an important question to be asking in this day and age of connectivity, right?
Yeah.
And how does everyone get to be part of that experience in the moment? We had just migrated to Zoom before the pandemic, and so we're remarkably prepared, well prepared for that aspect of the connectivity. And I'm in a design organization, and really that's the human-centered design focus of the work. So we work with product and tech partners and data science partners. And as a techie, it's living the dream because it's HCI, it's all the things that are part of the tech, the humanity part of tech. And we also found value, lots of value in these joint activity apps like Mural, M-U-R-A-L, or Lucid Spark, which are absolutely these white space kinds of environments where all of us could connect. And we had an offsite earlier this year for the first time for some of our executives, and we had one person who was not able to travel and was virtual. And we found, as we get more to this hybrid conversation, that invoking the kinds of connectivity that we use when we're all virtual also worked when we were there in person. And that one person who wasn't there. So we were all, even though we were in the room, we had our computers open, we were all on Zoom. Any images that we created in the space, we took a picture of it and shared it so that we all had access to that digitized image.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things really matter.
Yeah.
And talk about inclusion, making sure everybody's part of the conversation, take a little bit of effort but go a long way. Yeah. I want to come back to that. We had a really great question to come in around the duality of tech. I think this is a really great question. What do you think about the duality of tech's impact during the pandemic? For example, how online conferencing connected people while social media deepened division? What an interesting question. Anybody want to go for that one? So how online conferencing connected people while social media deepened division, so there was this duality of the impact of tech.
So I don't think that was new. I don't know that I would necessarily agree that the pandemic created a tailwind, if you will, behind that. I will say, though, that I do believe that there was a way in which our belief that our digital world is on par with or is somehow the same as our physical world became more true. And so people's way in which they might compartmentalize or divide or see as separate their digital world from what we used to call the real world, I don't know that we even call it that anymore, just really, that ebbed a lot. I will say that I think people overstate how much connection really happens over digital. And I think this goes back to what you actually were talking about in terms of work in those hybrid meetings. I think that we believe that there is a way for us to create an equity in experience of remote and in person. And because we're technologists, we really want to solve that problem. Like, we really want to make it, like, we want to make that happen. We want that remote person to have the exact same experience as those people in the room. It is not possible. And I think that the part of us that wants to crack the nut also is the part of us that wants to believe that there is connection through the digital world that is on par with the physical. And because I have worked in the space so long, I just firmly know and understand when people tell you that 90% of communication is nonverbal, the way that that translates when you are in person with someone at a physical level is not translatable. And so part of what I think we have to do is to get really clear about what's the value proposition that we're trying to drive? What is the connection type that we want to have digitally? And what is the connection that we want to have when we're in person? And if we differentiate on that in a way that I think is in keeping with what is actually true, what we can end up with is a really honest way in which we connect with each other across those mediums that honor them for what they actually are, and stop creating these ways in which I think we fall prey and victim to giving them more power than they should actually have. I believe that the division that we have sown across these digital platforms is because we have taken the noise of the digital universe and we have given it too much power.
So we're not going to go talk about the metaverse, but I just hear it all in your voice, right? In terms of what does that even mean, and what does it mean to create digital experiences that mimic or provide real world differentiation or non-differentiation, right? This is not that conversation. Maybe that's something we can talk about in the future, Valerie. But before we go into some other really great questions, which actually are...
Can I?
Yeah, I would love for you to answer.
Okay. I'm struck by what you said, and what also comes up for me when I hear that question too is the ability to flow from digital to physical. I think that we have had to grapple with that in a way that we never have before. So when I think about the divisiveness that we've seen, especially over the past couple of years, I won't say that it started then. I think about the fact that, for example, when the pandemic first started, so many of us were on social media, right? Using Zoom or Hangouts or, whatever platform that we chose to connect with folks. We were consuming so much news, and there's so much bias in what people post because it's from their perspective. Yeah. And so I think about this inability, but also building the muscle, which we're going to have to continue to do, especially when we talk about VR and the metaverse, of what is physical and what is virtual, and how are we intentionally assigning for ourselves, but also collectively, what those meanings are, and letting those meanings dictate how we engage, as opposed to letting the platform itself dictate, the news that we receive.
That's the danger, though, right?
Yeah.
It's because part of what I was trying to hint at, and I probably should have been more explicit, the curation aspect of the digital universe is absolutely the point, right? I can't curate my physical world.
Right.
Right? I gotta go outside and I walk into what is there. I do not have to do that in the digital universe. It can be as highly curated as I want, and therefore, the division that is sown by virtue of the fact that people are more and more choosing curation at higher and higher levels and degrees, then means that the choice becomes the delimiter rather than the fact that you are sometimes at the mercy of random. And so when you take that out, you take out the opportunity for you to be faced with things that you're not choosing. Now, the flip side of that, to your point, in when we talked about it in some of our opening notes, sometimes for people of color, and sometimes for people who don't want to be at the mercy of what's outside the door when you walk outside the door, that curation is welcome and can sometimes be life-saving, right? So it's not absolute, but it is important to understand that the echo chamber is not always your friend, and you have to have an awareness of the fact that that highly curated nature of that world has consequences that are not always positive, even if there are sometimes.
Look, I can just listen to both of you talk. The questions are rolling in, and we don't have a lot of time, but I want to hinge on that for a little bit, because there's a really great question that came in that asks, I suspect in this context of the last 2 years, perhaps where we didn't begin to see that there were these inequities in some of the tech that we have, but it made it more obvious. This one question is, which tech innovations developed for the pandemic, perhaps, do you think have stuck around longer than needed? Like, that's a really great question. As we think a little bit, muse, if you will, about what becoming more digitized looks like. How are we making the decisions around what becomes curated and what doesn't, and who decides what works in certain spaces and others, and not in others, right? So, any thoughts about what you've seen in the space of tech innovations that were developed perhaps during the pandemic? But I won't limit us there. Maybe there are some other technologies that maybe have stuck around for longer than necessary, or maybe, if this questioner will give me the liberty, haven't served perhaps the purpose for which they were intended. Maybe that's another way of thinking about this, because this idea of curation of content and creating your own virtual spaces, in the real world, you don't have that choice. So what does it look like when you don't have the choice of moving in these digital spaces because you don't own the content, or you didn't create the experiences that for someone else were designed to be amazing, but for us, or maybe for you, it was a very different kind of experience. So is there an example or anecdote that you can think of that really resonates for this particular question? Which is great. It's a stumper. You stumped us.
Yeah.
And I have
But
to
it's a
tell
good one.
you, I know I'm not answering the question, but what comes to my mind right now, and it won't leave, so I'm just going to say it, is not necessarily a particular technology, but the problem of volume. So I feel like what has stuck around is plus, plus, plus. You got email, you've got chat, you've got chat rooms, you've got text message, you've got all of these different modes of communication, and I think the reason why is because we like choice, we like optionality, we like all these different ways. But what has happened is all of that volume and all of those different mediums land on the single person in a way that is unmanageable And I think that the pandemic exposed that even more. And our answer was to give people more platforms and more tools.
Yeah.
And I think that has stuck around longer than it should. And we need to figure out how to pare down and how to move to best practice and how to do so in a way that unfortunately means that we're going to probably have to say goodbye to some things that might be beloved by some people, but the resulting simplicity that results for everybody will be worth it.
Yeah.
Ubiquity and mobility might equal equity, right? In that context.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, you need to get on a t-shirt. We're running out of time here. There's just so much goodness here. This other question that Natalia asked, I think is one that helps to bridge this conversation around hybrid and supporting those who are from traditionally marginalized communities. I am triggered by using the term underrepresented to refer to us as people because I'm not under anything, as my friend Tiffany says. And I think we've begun to use statistical words to describe populations of people or situations or experiences to support and define people, which is the wrong thing to do when you're talking about people of color, which is another umbrella term. I'm trying to get through BIPOC too. There's so many of them. But the point is, there are different lived experiences. And this question that Natalia asks is, the quality of hybrid work is inherently related to the economic and social resources one has.
Yeah.
How can tech improve to accommodate minorities in the virtual world? You want to start with that one?
Yeah, I think number one, we have to make sure that the tech that we have is actually inclusive of different experiences. So I think a lot about product inclusion. For example, something that I was actually able to manage working from home that was actually challenging as I was navigating different environments, even offices, was actually literally showing up how I wanted to on camera. So, or on video. So being chocolate, which I love and I'm proud of, but if you can only see my glasses and my teeth, that's an issue for me. That's a real issue for me. And so, for example, now I got a whole setup at home. I got a light coming in here. I'm by the window. The soft light is coming in this way. And what that's done, though, is actually caused people to say, like, oh, wow, this looks great. And I'm like, exactly. And so what does this need to look like as we go in different offices, right? Or as I'm navigating my phone. So, for example, the Pixel, one of the things that we've done is something called True Tone. And so people who have different skin tones and hues, particularly the more brown you are, you actually show up in a way that's who you truly are and reflective of the beauty that is there. So I think number one, we have to actually start by our products literally reflecting who we are. I also think in terms of, accessibility, I think that there are so many economic barriers to tech. So we're in a world where when you talk to students, and what they're learning in the classroom and how they're learning it, if you don't have a laptop or an iPad or even a phone, you literally can't do your homework. And that's something that has changed so rapidly and so quickly. It's causing, true barriers to folks actually being able to have the knowledge and information and experiences, that they want and that they need. And so I think, a big part of what we have to do as well is to make sure that the tech that we're creating is actually able to be used by all of us and not just a select few.
So I'm not saying this to be controversial necessarily, but I do think that there is a place where we have to get baseline, right? And I think we have to be honest about what baseline is. Yeah. And I don't know that we're honest all the time. I think that we want so much to make everything equitable and make everything available to everybody, that we don't always tell the truth about what baseline is, right? If you're going to participate in the modern world and you want to have access to the opportunities that come with tech and the ability to be able to do these types of tech roles and make a difference in any type of job these days, because everybody is in that place. The ways in which we have to help people understand how they have to think about what is required for entry has to be honest. And I find that sometimes we don't have those honest conversations. And so the choices that people make, perhaps, about how they spend their money, about what they prioritize in terms of your household bills, right, might change if we just have frank conversations about the fact that if you want to be able to participate in this world, high-speed internet is something you're gonna have to prioritize. If you can't prioritize it because your bills say I can't, then you have to be understanding about the fact that this is cost of entry, so how do I start to think about it as a necessity and not a nice to have? That changes the conversation and the frame. There's no way that we are going to be able to change the way in which technology at scale requires certain baseline things. What we can do is work at scale to ensure that those foundational things are able to be had by most, and then hopefully almost all, of the people who we want it to be available to. I honestly, I have seen when I have had really frank conversations with people who people put in a category of these people are from socioeconomic backgrounds that find it challenging. Once they understood, oh, you mean I gotta have that every day? Or, oh, you mean my data plan on my cell phone won't support it? Oh, well, why didn't somebody just tell me that? How much is it to get Verizon? Or, oh, if I stop getting the paper TV and I just swap that out for high-speed internet, I could just make that swap and then all of a sudden all of this is accessible to me. Sometimes it doesn't even occur to us to have those very tactical conversations about the trade-offs that might be necessary that don't show up in your frame of vision because this isn't your world. And sometimes it's not even occurring to us, oh, you don't understand that. Oh, if I start there, perhaps this is more in your control than I think. And that's the other thing, is I think that a lot of times we don't give people who we think are at disadvantage enough credit for what they might be able to do if they understood the game board. We don't do a great job of explaining the game board.
Yeah.
And we should spend more time doing that.
And I think that what that makes me think of too is literally making knowledge and information accessible. Because the ability to have those conversations, right? When I think about the world we live in and literally how privilege is set up, our society, our economy is set up in a way that different people, depending on what you have, right, what your economic status or class is, you don't even have access to the information.
That's right.
And you don't even have access to that conversation. So that's so spot on.
And with that, we're out of time. We're actually over time. And so many great questions came in. Thank you for the questions. We're not talking about such a behavior shift here, which is hard. Culture and behavioral change is hard. We're just talking about acknowledging that to be inclusive means to acknowledge what we don't recognize as the barriers that might seem different from us and the people we're trying to serve. And what does that look like? Which is exactly why you're here. Resilience, adaptability, innovation and computing. You're here for those very kinds of problems to solve. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for having us. Have a great conference.
Thank you.